For 3 decades, the world's most celebrated specialists looked at Olivia Kensington and saw only limits. Then a delivery driver carrying a cardboard box looked at her foot and saw something move. What happened next will make you question everything you think you know about the word impossible. If this story reaches your heart, hit that like button right now. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now sit back. This one is going to stay with you. The morning Olivia Kensington turned 30, her assistant sent flowers. 50 white peonies in a crystal vase, arranged by someone at a florist on Fifth Avenue who had never met her, and probably never would. The card read, "Wishing you a wonderful year ahead. The Kensington Group Corporate Team." Olivia read it once, set it face down on the corner of her desk, and went back to the earnings report she'd been reviewing since 5:30 in the morning. She didn't hate birthdays exactly, she'd just stopped expecting them to mean anything. The 42nd floor of the Kensington Group's Manhattan headquarters was quiet at that hour. The cleaning crew had already come and gone, leaving the glass and steel surfaces polished to a mirror sheen, the kind of tidiness that looked architectural rather than human. Olivia liked it best this way. Before the assistants arrived, before the phone started, before the day became a managed performance of authority and composure. In the early morning, it was just her and the city spread out below, still gray and waking, and she could sit at her desk and work without anyone watching to see how she did it. That part mattered more than most people understood. She moved her wheelchair with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done it for so long that the action had become invisible even to herself. Left hand, right hand, a slight lean to turn the corner around her desk. She'd stopped thinking about it sometime in her early 20s, which was around the same time she'd stopped letting herself think about the alternative. The neurologist who'd treated her at 15 had been gentle and thorough and completely certain. So had the one at 19, and the one at 22, and the one her mother had flown in from Munich when Olivia graduated from Harvard Business School, and her mother was still trying to fix things that couldn't be fixed. Spinal cord injury at T6. Incomplete, but the prognosis is clear. She has full upper body function. She will not walk again. That was the sentence her life had been organized around for 15 years before she turned 30. By the time she reached 30, it had been 30, a third of a century. Longer than some of her junior executives had been alive. She pulled up the earnings document on her second monitor and highlighted a discrepancy in the third quarter logistics numbers. Her coffee was going cold. She didn't notice. The accident had happened on a Tuesday in October, which Olivia knew with the kind of precision that only comes from having told the story so many times. To doctors, to journalists, to the board members who'd needed reassurance when she was appointed CEO at 26, that it had become more like a recitation than a memory. She was 8 years old. The family's driver had run a red light 2 blocks from her school. The other car hit them on the passenger side, which was her side, and she'd woken up 3 days later in a hospital with her mother crying at the foot of the bed and a dull, heavy absence in the lower half of her body that she hadn't understood yet. She'd understood it soon enough. Her father, Richard Kensington, had been the kind of man who solved problems. He was the founder of the Kensington Group, a logistics and real estate empire worth $11 billion, and he approached his daughter's injury the way he approached everything, with resources, with strategy, with an absolute refusal to accept that something couldn't be changed if you threw enough money and intelligence at it. The next 12 years involved 3 countries, 7 surgical centers, 15 specialists, 2 experimental nerve regeneration programs that were still in clinical trials, and 1 quietly devastating afternoon in Olivia's senior year of high school when the last doctor her father had hired closed his folder and said, as kindly as he could manage, that they had reached the boundary of what medicine was capable of doing for her. Richard Kensington died of a heart attack when Olivia was 24. She sometimes thought it had broken something in him, that boundary. Not the money or the company. Those were fine. Those she had inherited in full and built past anything he'd imagined. Something quieter. Something he'd never said out loud. She'd inherited that too. The Kensington Group occupied 11 floors of the building on 6th Avenue. The executive suite took up most of the 42nd floor, with Olivia's corner office commanding views in 2 directions, south toward the harbor, east toward Brooklyn. The office had been retrofitted for accessibility when she took over from the interim CEO, who'd managed the transition after her father's death, and it had been done well. The same could be said for most of her life, actually. It had been retrofitted for accessibility and done well, and the result was a version of existence that was functional and powerful and missing something she couldn't precisely name. She was reviewing the third-quarter logistics discrepancy when Marcus, her chief of staff, appeared in the doorway at 7:45 with a tablet in one hand and a look on his face that meant something had gone sideways. "Morning," he said. "Happy birthday." "What happened?" "The Meridian shipment. It was supposed to clear customs in Newark yesterday. It didn't. There's a hold on the medical equipment in the container." Olivia set down her pen. "Which medical equipment?" "The rehabilitation systems for the Portland clinic, the ones they've been waiting on since August." She pulled up the file from memory, which she could do with most active accounts because she'd always had the kind of brain that stored logistics like other people stored phone numbers. The Portland Children's Rehabilitation Clinic was a nonprofit she personally funded, quietly, through a shell account that kept the Kensington name off the records. It served kids with spinal injuries, paralysis, traumatic brain injuries, 53 kids currently in active programming. She had never visited in person. "Get someone to the Newark facility today," she said. "Not a courier service. One of our people, someone who can push through a manual release. I want those systems on a truck to Portland by 6 o'clock. Our regular freight coordinator is out sick. I can send... Use whoever we have available," she said. "Just get it done." Marcus nodded and disappeared. Olivia turned back to the earnings report. The coffee was cold. She still didn't notice. Miss it. Logan Brooks woke up at 5:15 to the sound of his daughter calling his name from down the hall. He lay still for 3 seconds, a habit he'd developed not from laziness but from the need to collect himself before the day started, because the day started hard and didn't let up. And then he pushed back the covers and went to her room. Stella was 7 and small for her age and had her mother's eyes, which Logan was still in the process of learning to look at without feeling something complicated happen in his chest. She was sitting up in bed with her hair pushed sideways from sleep and her stuffed rabbit, whose name was Captain, pressed against her cheek. "I had the dream again," she said. Logan sat on the edge of her bed. "The one with the ocean? The one where I can't find you?" He pulled her in and held her for a minute without saying anything, because there wasn't much to say, and she wasn't really asking for words. She was 7. She'd lost her mother 14 months ago. She needed him to be there and solid, and that was the one thing he could do reliably, even when everything else was falling apart. "I'm right here," he said. "I know," she said. "But in the dream, you're not." He held her until she stopped being rigid, until her breathing evened out and she started pulling at a loose thread on his sleeve the way she did when she was coming back to herself. Then he got her settled again, brought her a glass of water, turned the nightlight back on because she'd turned it off herself last week and then regretted it, and went to the kitchen to make coffee and figure out how to fit 3 shifts into one day. Logan was 32 and had been in New York for 6 years, arriving from a small city in Ohio with a mechanical engineering degree from a state university that had not yet opened any of the doors he'd expected it to open. He'd worked in manufacturing quality control, in warehouse management, in 2 different startups that had failed in ways that were instructive but not lucrative. When his wife, Dana, got the position at a design firm in Manhattan, they'd moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in Astoria and told themselves it was temporary, a launching point, the kind of not yet that eventually becomes yes. Dana died in a car accident on the BQE on a Sunday morning in March. She'd been on her way back from a client meeting in Long Island City. The other driver was drunk at 10 in the morning, which was the kind of detail that Logan had spent a long time trying to find meaning in before he accepted there wasn't any. After the funeral, after the weeks of people bringing food and sitting in his living room and asking if he was okay, after all of that, he had to figure out how to raise Stella and pay rent in New York City on a single income. His engineering degree was good, but the positions it qualified him for required either relocation or hours that would mean Stella in daycare until 7 or 8 at night, which wasn't something he was willing to do. So he'd built a patchwork, a part-time position doing inventory management for a mid-size electronics distributor 3 days a week and a contract gig with a logistics company called Aerofreight that handled specialized deliveries for corporate accounts. Aerofreight paid better than it should have and asked more than it should have. Logan was fine with both. The call from Aerofreight came in at 8:30. "We've got a priority pickup from the Newark Customs facility," said the dispatcher, a woman named Carol who communicated exclusively in flat, task-oriented sentences that Logan had come to appreciate. "Medical equipment hold. The client wants manual release pushed through and same-day delivery to a staging location in Midtown. It's going to take some paperwork." "How much paperwork?" "You'll need to talk to a supervisor at Customs, probably 2 supervisors. Client account is Kensington Group. They want it handled by noon." Logan looked at the clock on the microwave. Stella was at school until 3. He had the electronics job in the afternoon, but he could push that call to tomorrow if he needed to. "I can do it," he said. "Send me the documentation." He was in his car by 8:50, the documentation loading on his phone, a coffee going cold in the cup holder. He had learned to drink cold coffee so gradually that he no longer noticed it, which was not a skill he'd set out to develop. The customs facility in Newark was exactly as frustrating as Carol had implied it would be. The first supervisor was apologetic and unhelpful. The second supervisor was neither but eventually located the correct form. There was a third person, a compliance officer whose title Logan never got clearly, who reviewed the documentation for 25 minutes before approving the release. The entire process took 2 hours and 40 minutes, during which Logan stood at a counter, sat in a plastic chair, stood at the counter again, and drank bad vending machine coffee that was somehow worse than no coffee at all. He was loading the last of the equipment crates into the back of the freight van when his phone rang. Kensington Group. "Mr. Brooks?" The voice was a man's, but Marcus, the chief of staff whose name was on the account paperwork. "I'm checking on the Newark situation." "Loading now," Logan said, closing the van door. "I should be in Midtown by 1 o'clock, depending on the tunnel." "Good. There's been a slight change. Ms. Kensington would like the equipment staged in the building's loading dock, but she also wants someone to walk her through the shipping manifest in person before it goes out to Portland. Are you able to do that?" Logan had done this before. Clients who wanted a human being standing in front of them to confirm what a spreadsheet already said. It added time, but it was part of the job. "Sure," he said. 1 o'clock. He didn't know anything about Olivia Kensington except that she ran a company whose name was on a lot of the freight he handled, and that someone in her office was apparently very particular about medical equipment. The Kensington Group's loading dock was in the basement of the building on 6th Avenue, and the freight elevator that served it was slow and smelled like machine oil and decades of use. Logan rode it up to the 42nd floor with the shipping manifest in a folder, his work shirt slightly dusty from the warehouse, and a general expectation that the meeting would take 15 minutes. The woman who met him in the reception area outside Olivia's office was a junior assistant named Priya, who was professional and efficient, and looked at his work shirt with an expression that stopped just short of visible judgment. She asked him to wait. He waited. The office beyond the glass wall was large and precisely arranged, and the woman at the desk had her back to him, talking on a phone and making small, decisive marks on a printed document. When she turned around and wheeled toward the door, Logan noticed a few things in quick succession. She was young, younger than he'd expected for someone running a company this size. She was beautiful in the kind of way that seems to come from structure rather than effort. Sharp features and direct eyes that looked at you with the flat appraisal of someone who had learned early that most people underestimated them. She moved the wheelchair with a total absence of self-consciousness that he recognized as the product of years, not attitude. And she looked at him the way she probably looked at everyone new, like she was waiting to find out whether he was worth the time. "You're from Aerofreight?" she said. "Logan Brooks." He offered his hand. She shook it, firm, brief. "I've got the manifest for the Portland shipment. Come in." She went through the manifest with the focus of someone who'd been reviewing logistics documents since before she could drive, which Logan suspected was literally true. She asked 2 questions about the customs delay that were better questions than either of the supervisors had asked, and she spotted a discrepancy in the weight listing for one of the crates. A labeling error, minor, but one that could have created problems at the Portland end. "Good catch," Logan said. She glanced up. "It's my job." He was about to respond when it happened. He was standing to the left of her desk, holding the folder, and she shifted in her wheelchair to reach for a pen. A slight forward lean, weight redistributing, and he saw her right foot move. Not a spasm, not an involuntary tremor, a deliberate flex, her toes pressing down, her ankle angling inward the way a foot does when the muscles beneath it are working. It lasted less than 2 seconds. Then her foot was still again, and she was writing a correction on the manifest, and the moment was just gone, sitting there in the air between them like something he might have imagined. He hadn't imagined it. "Your foot moved," he said. She stopped writing. The pause was so precise it felt deliberate. "Excuse me?" "Just now when you leaned forward. Your right foot. You flexed it." The look she gave him was difficult to categorize. It wasn't embarrassment exactly, and it wasn't anger yet. It was something closer to the expression of a person who has heard something before and developed a protective response to it, a kind of patient, preemptive exhaustion. "Mr. Brooks," she said, and the formality in it was a closing statement. "I've been using this wheelchair since I was 8 years old. I've been evaluated by some of the best neurological specialists in the world. I appreciate the observation, but I know what I saw," he said. It came out quieter than he'd intended, and somehow that made it worse. Or better, he wasn't sure. He wasn't trying to argue with her. He wasn't trying to prove something. He just said it because it was true, and he'd never been good at not saying true things. The silence stretched. She was looking at him with those flat, appraising eyes, and he had the uncomfortable feeling that she was deciding something. "The manifest is corrected," she said finally. "You can have the shipment on its way to Portland by 3. "Yes, ma'am." He picked up the folder. He was halfway to the door. "Mr. Brooks?" He turned. Olivia Kensington was sitting very still behind her desk, and whatever she was about to say appeared to cost her something. He could see it in the slight set of her jaw, in the way her hands were resting flat on the desk surface, like she was pressing something down. "When I leaned forward," she said, "what exactly did you see?" He described it carefully without dramatizing it, the way he'd describe a mechanical anomaly in a system he was trying to diagnose. The flex of the toes, the inward rotation at the ankle, the duration, the fact that it had stopped when she settled back. He told her it wasn't subtle he might have questioned, and that it looked like a voluntary movement, not a reflex arc. She listened without interrupting. "I've had involuntary muscle responses before," she said when he was done. "Spasms. It's not uncommon with my injury type." This didn't look like a spasm. "And you're qualified to make that distinction because—" "Mechanical engineering," he said, "not medicine. But I've spent a long time working around equipment that fails in unexpected ways. And what I know is that unexpected movement in a system that's supposed to be static is usually worth paying attention to." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at her right foot. She leaned forward slowly, deliberately, and concentrated. Nothing happened. She tried again, a different angle, and still nothing. Her face went through something complicated. Irritation, then the particular kind of pain that comes from trying and failing, and she sat back. "I can't reproduce it," she said. Her voice was controlled. "It happened," Logan said. "I saw it." "You saw something?" "Yeah, I did." She was quiet for a moment. Then, with the tone of someone offering something against their better judgment, "I have a standing appointment with a physical therapist every other week. It's maintenance. There's no treatment plan." Logan nodded. "I'll mention it to her," Olivia said. "That's all I'm agreeing to. And you don't mention this to anyone associated with this company or this account. Understood?" "Understood," he said. He left her office with the corrected manifest and the freight van still double parked in the loading zone, and an unsettled feeling he couldn't quite name. Not triumph, not certainty, just the low hum of something that hadn't been closed yet. He was in Astoria by 3:15 to pick up Stella from the neighbor who watched her after school on his Aero freight days. Stella came out with paint on her elbow and her backpack hanging off one shoulder and immediately wanted to know if they could get dumplings for dinner. "Dumplings are expensive," Logan said, "not the ones from the cart." He couldn't argue with that. They got dumplings from the cart on the corner and ate them at the kitchen table while Stella told him in elaborate detail about a disagreement she'd had with a boy named Owen over who had correctly identified a bird in their class nature journal. The bird was, apparently, a cedar waxwing. "Were you right?" Logan asked. "Obviously." She dipped a dumpling. "Do you know what a cedar waxwing looks like?" "Not really." She got up and got her nature journal and showed him. He looked at the bird, then at his daughter, then at the nature journal again. He thought, briefly and without knowing why, about a woman sitting behind a large desk on the 42nd floor of a building in Midtown, looking at her own right foot. "Yeah," he said. "That's a cedar waxwing." Stella nodded with the satisfaction of someone who'd expected nothing less. 3 days later, Logan's phone rang from an unknown number. He almost didn't answer. "This is Olivia Kensington." He pulled the car over. He was between runs, heading back through Queens, and put it in park. "I spoke to my physical therapist," she said, Dr. Renata Marsh. "She's been working with me for 4 years. She reviewed the session notes from this week." A pause. "She said she's noticed some inconsistencies in my response patterns over the past several months that she hasn't been able to explain. She dismissed them as data artifacts. Measurement inconsistencies." Logan didn't say anything because he didn't know yet what she wanted from him. "I'm not saying you were right," Olivia said. "I'm saying there might be something worth looking at more carefully. Dr. Marsh wants to run a new EMG, electromyography, to get current readings on motor nerve activity." "Okay," Logan said. "I wanted to tell you," she said, and there was something slightly awkward in it, as if she wasn't entirely sure why she was telling him and was already halfway regretting the call. "I appreciate it," he said. "I don't know why I'm telling you," she said. "I think," Logan said carefully, "because you wanted someone to know. Not your team, not the specialist, just someone." The silence on the line had a different quality than he expected. Not offense, something more uncertain. "The EMG is Friday," she said finally. "I'll have results by next week." "I hope they show something," he said. Another pause. "So do I," she said. "Don't tell anyone about this conversation either." "I won't." She hung up. Logan sat in the parked car for a moment with the phone in his hand, watching a pigeon investigate a crack in the sidewalk. Then he pulled back into traffic and drove. The EMG results came back on a Wednesday, and Olivia stared at them for 45 minutes before she called Dr. Marsh. "Tell me what I'm looking at," she said. Renata Marsh had a careful, unhurried way of speaking that Olivia had valued for 4 years, specifically because it contained no false comfort. She didn't soften things. She laid them flat. "There's residual motor activity in several muscle groups below your injury level," Renata said. "It's low amplitude, inconsistent, but it's there. It shouldn't be, based on your previous imaging." "But it is. But it is." Olivia set the EMG report down. "What does that mean?" "It could mean several things. It could mean the original imaging was limited by the technology available in 2002. It could mean there's been some spontaneous, incomplete recovery that no one has been monitoring for because recovery was considered ruled out. Or," Renata paused in a way that felt deliberate, "it could mean that your injury was always incomplete in ways that weren't fully characterized, and that the gap between what you were told and what your nervous system has been doing for 30 years is larger than anyone understood." Olivia was quiet for a moment. "You should have caught this." "Yes," Renata said. "I should have been looking more carefully. I'm sorry." It was the honesty that got her, more than the information. Olivia had been dealing with doctors her whole adult life, and most of them were careful, and some of them were brilliant, and almost none of them said "I'm sorry" without also immediately explaining why it wasn't entirely their fault. "What do we do now?" Olivia asked. "I want to refer you to someone," Renata said. "Dr. Yuki Tanaka. She's at Columbia Presbyterian. She specializes in incomplete SCI recovery and neural retraining. She's seen cases like yours before. Not identical, but similar." "Cases that were written off." "Cases that were written off," Renata confirmed. Olivia looked out the window at the city below. It was early evening, that specific gray-gold hour when the light hit the glass of the buildings opposite and turned them into something that almost looked warm. "Schedule it," she said. She called Logan that evening. She told herself it was a courtesy, a simple exchange of information, the completion of a loop that had started in her office with a shipping manifest and an observation she hadn't asked for. She told herself that and dialed anyway. "They found motor activity," she said when he picked up. "Residual. In muscle groups that were supposed to be gone." She heard him exhale. It wasn't a dramatic sound, it was just breath, and somehow that was more tolerable than an exclamation would have been. "What happens next?" he asked. "I'm being referred to a specialist at Columbia, someone who works with cases like mine." The phrase felt strange, cases like hers, like there were others. "I don't know what's going to come of it." "No," he said, "but you're going to find out. I might find out it's nothing, that the activity is too low to be meaningful." "Maybe," he said, "but at least you'll know." She was quiet for a moment. Through the window, the city was fully dark now, and the glass of the buildings opposite had gone back to just glass. "Why did you say something?" she asked. "When you saw it, most people wouldn't have." She heard him think about it. Actually think, not just reach for the first available answer. She found she respected that. "I work in logistics," he said. "My whole job is noticing when something is off and saying so. Most of the time it's a mislabeled crate or a weight discrepancy. This time it was something else." A pause. "I just said what I saw, that's all." "Most people see what they expect to see," Olivia said. "Yeah," Logan said. "I know." She almost said thank you. The word was right there. She let it go. "I'll keep you updated," she said instead. "If that's acceptable." "It's acceptable," he said. She hung up and stayed at the window a while longer. And the city did its usual, indifferent thing of going on being itself, regardless of what any individual person was feeling about it. And Olivia thought about a foot that moved and a man who'd noticed, and about 30 years of being absolutely certain about what was impossible. She wasn't certain anymore. That was the most frightening thing that had happened to her in a very long time. Dr. Yuki Tanaka's office at Columbia Presbyterian was nothing like the specialists Olivia had seen over the years. There were no diplomas arranged in a careful arc above the desk, no framed citations from medical journals, no visual argument for authority. There was a whiteboard on one wall covered in diagrams, a desk buried under stacked folders, and a small cactus on the windowsill that looked like it hadn't been watered in several weeks but was surviving anyway. Olivia noticed the cactus first and then felt strange about noticing it. Tanaka herself was 60-something, Japanese-American, with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and the kind of direct, unhurried attention that made you feel like she had nowhere else to be. Which was probably not true, given that her scheduling coordinator had told Olivia she was fitting her in between 2 other appointments and a grant review committee call, but it didn't feel that way. "I've read your file," Tanaka said. "All of it. The original injury report from 2002, the surgical records, the neurological assessments, all 7 of them." She set the folder on the desk in a way that was almost gentle, the way you'd set down something fragile. "I want to tell you something before we start, and I'd like you to hear it without immediately deciding what it means. Can you do that?" Olivia said, "I'll try." "The assessments you've had over the years were not wrong exactly," Tanaka said, "but they were incomplete. The imaging technology available in 2002 and even in 2009, when your last comprehensive scan was done, had real limitations in resolving certain types of nerve pathway structures. What reads as absent on older imaging sometimes isn't absent. It's just below the resolution threshold." "You're saying the technology couldn't see it?" "I'm saying the technology available at the time may not have been able to see all of it." Tanaka paused. "Your injury is at T6, incomplete, which was correctly identified. What was not correctly identified, or more precisely, what was never revisited with current technology, is the extent of preserved pathway integrity below the lesion site." Olivia was quiet. She had a practiced stillness that she'd developed over years of sitting across from people who had news for her, and she used it now. The kind of stillness that looks like calm but is actually just a body holding itself very tightly. I want to do a full imaging workup, Tanaka continued. MRI, updated EMG mapping, and a transcranial magnetic stimulation study. The TMS will give us a much clearer picture of which motor pathways are actually functioning versus dormant. It takes about 3 hours total. And then? And then we'll know what we're actually working with. Not what was assumed 20 years ago, what's actually there now. Olivia looked at the cactus on the windowsill, then at Tanaka. I've been told what I'm working with many times, she said. It tends to end the same way. I know, Tanaka said. She didn't say this time will be different, and Olivia noticed that specifically, the absence of it. But those conclusions were based on incomplete information. I'm not asking you to hope for anything yet. I'm asking you to let me see what's actually there. That was the part that was hardest, and Tanaka seemed to know it without being told. Not the tests, not the possible results, but the opening back up of a question Olivia had spent 30 years learning to treat as answered. Schedule the imaging, Olivia said. Seb. She didn't tell Marcus. She didn't tell the board or her mother, who was retired in Connecticut, and still called every Sunday with a careful cheerfulness that contained, somewhere underneath it, the same grief she'd carried since Olivia was 8. She didn't tell anyone in her professional orbit, which was most of her orbit. She told Logan. She wasn't entirely sure why. She thought about it on the drive back from Columbia, sitting in the back of the car while her driver navigated the FDR, watching the river go by. Logan Brooks was a contract freight worker she'd met 11 days ago over a shipping manifest. He had no connection to her medical history, no stake in the outcome, no professional obligation to the situation. Maybe that was exactly why. She texted him. Saw the specialist at Columbia. Imaging scheduled for next Thursday. She thinks there may be preserved pathway integrity that was never properly mapped. He responded 12 minutes later, which she found herself tracking without meaning to. That's significant. How are you doing with it? She started typing fine and deleted it. Then typed, I don't know, and sent that instead. That makes sense, he wrote back. It's a big thing to sit with. She put her phone down and watched the river. Guachinat. The imaging took 3 hours and 20 minutes, which was more than Tanaka had estimated, because Olivia's nervous system did something during the TMS study that made the technician pause the protocol and check her equipment twice before confirming that the readings were accurate. Olivia lay in the scanning room and stared at the ceiling and tried not to want anything, which was something she had significant practice at and which she found this time was harder than usual. Tanaka reviewed the results herself rather than sending them through a resident. She called Olivia the following morning. I want to show you something in person, she said. Can you come in today? Olivia moved 3 meetings. I'll be there at noon. Bon. The images on Tanaka's screen were in colors Olivia had never learned to read. Blues and yellows and bright patches of red indicating activity, cold dark zones indicating absence. Tanaka walked her through them with the whiteboard and a marker, drawing lines and arrows, explaining in plain language what each region meant. These red areas, Tanaka said, circling a cluster with the marker, are motor pathway activity, cortical signals traveling down the spinal cord. In a complete injury, you don't see them. In a standard incomplete injury at T6, you'd expect to see them stop here, she made a mark, or become very degraded. What you're showing me is different. Olivia looked at the screen. She made herself look carefully, the way she looked at logistics data, without projection, without wanting the numbers to say something specific. The pathways are present, Tanaka continued. Degraded, yes. Significantly compressed and partially demyelinated, but present. There are functioning motor signals reaching muscle groups in your lower extremities that have not been stimulated or exercised in 3 decades because everyone assumed they weren't there. The room was very quiet. What does that mean in practical terms? Olivia said. Tanaka sat down. It means that with the right rehabilitation protocol, and I want to be honest with you that it would be intensive and long and not guaranteed, there may be real possibility for functional recovery. Not theoretical, real. She paused. I can't promise you walking. I want to be absolutely clear about that. What I can tell you is that I've seen patients with similar pathway profiles achieve significant functional gains with aggressive neural retraining therapy. How significant? One patient could wiggle her toes when she started. After 18 months, she was walking with forearm crutches. Tanaka watched Olivia's face. Another patient had a less responsive pathway structure and achieved standing tolerance, but not ambulation. I don't know yet where you fall on that spectrum, but I know you're not where anyone told you you were. Olivia was looking at the screen, at the bright red patches that were, apparently, her own nervous system doing something it wasn't supposed to be doing. My entire life, she said slowly, has been built on the assumption that this doesn't change. I know. My company, my routines, everything about how I move through the world. She paused. I'm not saying I don't want it. I'm saying I need you to understand what you're asking me to dismantle. Tanaka nodded. I do understand. And you don't have to decide anything today. But I'd like you to think about it seriously. Because what I'm looking at here, she gestured at the screen, represents an opportunity that has a timeline. Neural pathways that have been dormant this long can be reactivated, but the window for meaningful retraining isn't unlimited. The longer we wait, the harder it gets. Olivia looked at the screen for a long moment. Then she said, "What do we do first?" She told Logan that evening, standing, or rather sitting, in her office after everyone had gone home, the city spread out below the way it was every evening, indifferent and enormous, and lit up like something that didn't know how to stop. She wants to start with 6 weeks of intensive assessment, Olivia said. Baseline measurements, designing the protocol. Then rehabilitation begins. She's estimating at least a year of work before we know what the ceiling is. How do you feel about a year? Logan asked. He was at home. She could hear the ambient sound of his apartment. Something that might have been the television from another room. A child's voice, briefly, and then gone. I feel like a year is nothing, Olivia said. I've been in this chair for 30. True. I also feel like a year is an enormous amount of time to spend on something that might not work. Also true, Logan said. She appreciated that he didn't try to resolve the contradiction for her, just held both sides of it with her. It was an unusual quality. Most people, when faced with someone else's ambivalence, felt compelled to push one direction. She was honest with me, Olivia said. Tanaka. She didn't promise anything. She said she's seen patients in similar situations walk with crutches, and she's seen patients in similar situations not achieve ambulation. She doesn't know where I land. But she thinks there's something to work with. Yes. Logan was quiet for a moment. Then you work with it, he said. That's all you can do. You work with what's actually there instead of what everyone assumed was there. It was a simple thing to say. Simple things were often the most accurate. There's going to be pain, Olivia said. Tanaka was clear about that too. Waking up nerve pathways that have been dormant, it's not comfortable. She described it as resensitization, which I'm fairly certain is a clinical way of saying it's going to hurt. Are you telling me because you're worried or because you needed to say it out loud? She considered that. Both, she said. And I'm not someone who talks about things like this, usually. I know, he said. But you called. She had. She'd called instead of texted this time, without entirely planning to. She found the sound of an actual human voice more useful for certain kinds of information, and she was still figuring out what category Logan fell into. Your daughter, Olivia said. I heard her in the background. She's supposed to be asleep, Logan said. She's definitely not asleep. How old is she? 7. Her name is Stella. Olivia nodded, though he couldn't see it. Does she know what you do, the freight work? She knows I drive a big van sometimes, which she finds very impressive. A beat. She's going through a phase where she wants to know the exact weight of everything. Like, she'll pick up an orange and ask me how many grams it is. I've had to start looking things up. Olivia felt something shift in her chest that she didn't have an immediate word for. It wasn't pity. She'd been on the receiving end of pity her whole life, and she could identify it immediately. It was something else. Something that had to do with the specific texture of the detail, the orange and the grams, the child who wanted to know the weight of things, and the father who looked them up. You should go put her to sleep, Olivia said. Probably, Logan said. You gonna be okay? No one had asked her that in a long time without it feeling performative. "I don't know yet," she said. "Ask me in a year." The first session with Tanaka's rehabilitation team was on a Thursday morning in late October, in a room on the fourth floor of the Columbia Rehabilitation Wing that smelled like floor cleaner and hard work. There were mats, parallel bars, equipment she didn't recognize, and a physical therapist named Bernard who was built like a former athlete and had the patient, measuring attention of someone who'd spent years watching bodies do unexpected things. "We're starting with sensory mapping today," Bernard told her. "I'm going to touch different points on your lower body, and I need you to tell me exactly what you feel. Not what you think you should feel. What you actually feel." "I feel very little below my waist," Olivia said. "That's been consistent for 30 years. "Okay," Bernard said. "Let's find out what consistent looks like today." What consistent looked like today turned out to be more complicated than 30 years of certainty had suggested. There were areas of complete absence, just as she'd always known. But there were also areas, patches really, scattered and inconsistent, where the sensation was not absence but something more like noise. A vague, buzzing wrongness when Bernard pressed the end of the instrument against her shin, a faint pressure that registered on her right outer thigh. Not normal sensation, not what it would feel like in someone without her injury, but not nothing either. She had made herself not cry in medical settings since she was 14 years old. She maintained that. Bernard was matter-of-fact about it, clinical and careful, noting each response without attaching drama to it. "This is actually a better sensory landscape than I expected," he said, reviewing his notes. "There are gaps, but the pattern of preserved sensation is consistent with Dr. Tanaka's imaging findings." "What does that mean for the protocol?" "It means we have more to work with than a blank slate," he said. "We're going to start with electrical stimulation to the residual motor pathways, gentle, to establish baseline response, and parallel that with sensory integration work. The goal in the first 6 weeks is to remind your nervous system that it has these pathways. You've been spending 30 years not sending signals down them." "Because I was told there was nothing to receive them." "Right," Bernard said. "We're going to test that assumption pretty aggressively." The electrical stimulation, when it started, was strange rather than painful. A deep, unfamiliar sensation that sat somewhere between tickle and ache, nothing like the surface sensation she had limited access to. It felt like something waking up that had been asleep for a very long time and was not particularly happy about being disturbed. She stayed for 2 hours. When she came out to the parking area where her driver was waiting, she sat in the back of the car for several minutes without telling him to go anywhere, just sitting with the strange new hum in her lower body that was still there, faint but present, like a signal from a radio station that was very far away. She texted Logan. "First session done." "Strange. Not bad, just very strange." He responded, "Strange is progress. Strange means something moved." She looked at the message for a moment. Then she put her phone in her bag and told her driver to go. I saw 4 weeks into the protocol, she had her first involuntary leg movement during a stimulation session, a real one, not the small toe flex that Logan had caught in her office, but a full extension of her right knee that surprised her and Bernard both, and that she followed immediately by bursting into laughter that surprised her most of all. She couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed involuntarily. It had just come out. The shock of it, the pure strangeness of her own knee doing something unexpected, and Bernard's face in the moment of it, which had gone briefly unprofessional with something that looked a lot like delight before he composed himself and started writing notes. "Sorry," she said, still catching her breath. "Don't apologize for that," Bernard said. "That's the first voluntary adjacent motor output we've seen. It means the pathway carried the signal." "It surprised me," she said. "That's what we're going for." She called Logan that evening and told him about the knee and the laughter, and he laughed too. A short, genuine sound that she'd heard a few times now, and had come to recognize as different from his polite laugh, which was also real, but had a measured quality that this one didn't. "Involuntary laughter in a rehab session," he said. "That's a good sign." Bernard seemed pleased. "He should be." A pause. "How are you actually doing? Not the technical part, the rest of it." She thought about it honestly, the way she found herself doing more with him than with most people, which was still something she was in the process of getting used to. Tired, she said. The sessions take more out of me than I expected. Not physically. I mean, physically too, but it's more than that. It's like carrying something I didn't know I was carrying. 30 years of being told the story was finished, he said. She paused. That's a precise way to put it. You've been running a company and managing your life and doing all of it in a way that accounted for the story being finished. And now the story isn't finished, and everything you built assumes it is. Yes, she said. That. She shifted in her chair. I had a meeting with 2 board members last week who were trying to push through an executive restructuring proposal that I've been blocking for 8 months. And I'm sitting across from them thinking, they have no idea. They're moving pieces around a board, and I'm trying to work out whether my nervous system can learn to send a signal to my right knee. What'd you do about the board members? Block the proposal again. It's a bad proposal. She paused. I'm very good at my job. I know, he said, and the straightforwardness of it, the absence of flattery or qualification, settled into her in a way that she'd stopped trying to analyze. They talked for another 40 minutes, longer than either of them had planned. He told her about a difficult pickup that had gone sideways when a client's loading dock foreman had provided the wrong address, and Logan had ended up in the wrong industrial park in Jersey City, in the rain. She told him about a junior analyst who'd sent a merger memo to the wrong distribution list, and how she'd spent an hour managing the fallout with a calm she did not genuinely feel. He talked about Stella, who had apparently decided she wanted to learn chess and had beaten him twice already, using a strategy she claimed to have invented herself. She's 7, Olivia said. I know, Logan said. It's humbling. When she hung up, it was past 10:30. She hadn't eaten dinner. She hadn't noticed. She sat in the quiet office. She'd stopped going home early now, the way she'd been doing lately after rehab days when the tiredness sat too heavy in the evenings. And she thought about the way the conversation had moved, how naturally it had covered his day and her day without any particular urgency, without the managed information quality of her professional relationships or the careful gentleness of her mother's Sunday calls. It was something she didn't have a clean word for, and she was at a point in her life where she found it easier to sit with things she couldn't name than to rush them toward definition. The therapy was teaching her that, if nothing else, the patience for process, the willingness to wait for the signal to arrive instead of deciding in advance that it wasn't coming. Her right knee had moved today, unexpectedly, involuntarily, and it had made her laugh. She couldn't remember the last time her own body had surprised her. She found she wanted it to happen again. The thing about pain that no one tells you, or that Olivia had never let anyone tell her because she'd stopped the conversations before they could get there, is that it has layers. The surface layer is the one you can describe to a doctor. Sharp, dull, burning, pressure. The kind that shows up on a numbered scale. But underneath that is the other kind. The kind that doesn't have a clean descriptor, that feels more like something being corrected against its will, like a bone that healed crooked being rebroken so it can set straight. That was month 3. Bernard called it resensitization, which Olivia had anticipated would be unpleasant and turned out to be something else entirely. The stimulation sessions had escalated in intensity as her pathway responses improved, and what had started as a strange, distant hum had become, by November, something that woke her up at 2 a.m. with her lower body firing signals that didn't resolve into anything recognizable. Not pain exactly, not sensation exactly. Something in between that her nervous system had no prior vocabulary for, and was clearly unhappy about having to develop one. She lay in her bedroom in her apartment on the Upper West Side on those nights, and did not call anyone and did not text anyone and simply waited for it to pass. Which it did, eventually, the way most things did. Then she went back to sleep. Then she got up at 5:30 and went to work. She didn't tell Logan about the nights at first. She told him about the session results, the improving response metrics, the expanding sensory map, the new motor outputs that Bernard was documenting with the careful excitement of someone who'd trained for years to be measured and was finding it difficult. She gave him the technical version, which was accurate and complete, and left out the 2 a.m. part. He let her do that for about 3 weeks. Then one evening she called him and started explaining the latest EMG comparison data. And he said quietly, "Olivia, how are you sleeping?" She stopped mid-sentence. "Fine," she said. That was a very fast answer. She shifted the phone to her other ear. Outside, the city was doing its November thing, gray and damp and loud in a way that was different from summer loud, more compressed, everyone moving faster. I wake up sometimes. It's a side effect of the stimulation protocol. Tanaka said it's normal. Normal doesn't mean easy. No, she said. It doesn't. Are you eating? I'm eating. Are you eating like a person or eating like a CEO? She almost smiled. What's the difference? A person eats a meal. A CEO eats something from a container while reviewing a document and counts it as a meal. I had lunch today, she said. It was... She paused because she was genuinely trying to remember something with rice. That's very specific. I was in a meeting. He was quiet for a moment in the way that wasn't judgment, just taking something in. She'd learned to read his silences by now, the same way you learn to read the pauses in a conversation with someone you've been talking to for 2 months, longer than she'd initially expected this to go on. You don't have to give me the good version, he said. I'm not going to panic if you tell me it's hard. She was quiet for a moment. It was a simple thing to say, and it hit harder than it should have. It's hard, she said. Some nights it's very hard, and I don't know exactly what I'm doing it for. And then in the morning I go to the session, and Bernard shows me an output reading that's 15% stronger than it was last month, and I remember. But the nights are difficult. Thank you for telling me, Logan said. Don't make it a thing. I'm not making it a thing. I'm just... A pause. I know what those nights are like. When you're up at 2 in the morning and it's just you and whatever the hardest version of your current situation is, I know what that's like. She thought about what she knew of his history. Dana, the accident, Stella at 6 years old, and a father trying to hold everything together. Yeah, she said. I imagine you do. They stayed on the phone for a while after that without it being about the rehab or the freight work or any of the practical things. Just 2 people on the phone at 9:30 on a Tuesday in November, which was a thing that had apparently become part of her life without her formally agreeing to it. The complications started the second week of December. Not medical ones. Olivia had half expected medical complications. A plateau in the pathway response, a setback in motor output, something quantifiable that she could problem-solve her way around. What she hadn't anticipated was the other kind. It started with a woman named Helen Marsh. Helen was 63, a founding board member of the Kensington Group, and the closest thing to a political operator that a private company's governance structure could produce. She had voted to confirm Olivia as CEO at 26, with what she had described at the time as confidence in Olivia's capability, a sentence that had always contained in Olivia's hearing and implied despite everything. Helen was careful and strategic and had, in the past 8 months, been the primary architect behind the executive restructuring proposal that Olivia had blocked twice. Helen requested a private meeting on a Thursday afternoon with an agenda item listed as executive continuity planning, which was a phrase that could mean several things, and in Helen's vocabulary meant specifically the one Olivia liked least. I've been hearing some things, Helen said, once they were alone in the small conference room off the executive floor. She had the kind of voice that conveyed concern so smoothly it was almost impossible to locate the knife inside it. About your schedule? About the appointments? Olivia kept her face neutral. My schedule is managed by Marcus. If there are concerns about coverage... I'm not talking about coverage. Helen folded her hands on the table. I'm talking about what happens when the market hears that the CEO of the Kensington Group is pursuing a medical intervention of uncertain outcome while managing an $11 billion company. The room was very quiet. That's a significant overstep, Helen. I'm looking out for this company's interests. You're looking out for your restructuring proposal, Olivia said, which this company doesn't need and which I've rejected twice on sound strategic grounds. Helen's expression shifted slightly, the smoothness not breaking, but adjusting. Olivia, you've given your entire adult life to this company. No one respects what you've built more than I do. But you have to understand how this looks from the outside. A CEO making significant personal decisions at a time when the company is navigating a complex acquisition landscape. My personal decisions are not board business. Everything about this company is board business. Helen paused. All I'm suggesting is that you consider the optics and perhaps think about whether this is the right time. Olivia looked at her for a long moment. Helen held it well. She always held it well. But Olivia had been reading boardrooms since she was 24, and what she saw behind the careful expression was not actually concern. It was calculation. I appreciate your perspective, Olivia said. This meeting is finished. Helen left. Olivia stayed in the conference room for 4 minutes, not doing anything, just letting the specific quality of her anger settle so she could work with it rather than from inside it. Then she called Marcus. I need everything on the secondary shareholders supporting Helen's restructuring proposal. All of them. And I need to know who she's been talking to outside the building. This is about the meeting? Just get me the information. She told Logan about it that evening, because she'd apparently developed the habit of telling Logan about things, which was strange and also, she was starting to understand, not strange at all. She's trying to use the rehab against you, he said. She's trying to use the uncertainty against me, Olivia corrected. The rehab specifically isn't the problem. It's the narrative she can build around it. CEO pursuing unproven medical treatment, distracted from business, making decisions that prioritize personal outcomes. She paused. It's a playbook. I've seen it used before. Not against me, but I've seen it. What are you going to do? What I always do, Olivia said. Remove the leverage. If she can't get traction among the secondary shareholders, the restructuring proposal dies. And without the proposal, she has no real vector to push on the CEO question. And you can do that? I can do that. So then the problem, Olivia said, and she heard her voice change slightly, drop into something less controlled, is that she's not entirely wrong about the distraction, about the fact that I'm doing something that takes a significant amount of my attention and energy during a complicated period. A pause. I've been leaving meetings early. I've been delegating things I would normally handle myself. Not badly. Marcus has been solid, the work is getting done, but I'm operating at 90% instead of 100, and at this level, 10% is a lot. Is 90% enough to run the company effectively right now? Yes, she said, but it doesn't feel good. No, Logan said. I imagine being 90% yourself doesn't feel good when you're used to 100. She leaned back in her chair. The city outside was darker now, December dark, and the lights in the buildings opposite were gold and sharp. She made me doubt it, Olivia said. For about 30 seconds in that conference room, she made me actually question whether this was the right time. The admission cost her something. That's what I can't forgive. Not the attempt. The 30 seconds. 30 seconds isn't a long time. For me, it is. What ended the 30 seconds? Olivia thought about it. I thought about what it would mean to stop, she said slowly. Not stopping the work or the company, stopping the sessions. Going back to where I was in October, before Tanaka, before the imaging. And I realized I couldn't. Not because I was certain it would work, but because I couldn't be the person who looked at that imaging data, at those pathways that are actually there, and chose to leave them alone. I couldn't be that person. Logan didn't say anything for a moment. I need to ask you something, he said, and I need you to not immediately give me the version where you're fine. Ask. Are you doing this because you want it, or because stopping would feel like surrendering to Helen? It was a sharper question than she'd expected, and she sat with it for a moment because it deserved that. Both, she said finally. I want it. I have wanted to walk since I was 8 years old. And I buried that wanting because wanting impossible things is a particular kind of torture, and I didn't want to live tortured, but I want it. And now there's also the part that won't surrender to Helen. Both are real. Good, Logan said. Both are allowed. The discovery happened on a Tuesday. Logan was doing a routine account review for a medical equipment client, one of Aero Freight's steadier accounts. A company called Meridian Medical Logistics that handled hospital-grade rehabilitation systems. when he noticed something in the shipping records that didn't line up. It was small, the kind of thing that only registered because he was specifically familiar with the Kensington account and its related medical shipments. A sub-batch of sensory neural mapping equipment had been shipped to a neurology consulting firm in 2009. The consulting firm was listed as conducting an independent assessment for a private client. The shipping address corresponded to the building where Olivia had received her last comprehensive neurological evaluation, the one in 2009 that had confirmed definitively that her prognosis was unchanged. He cross-referenced it from 3 different angles, which took the better part of an evening after Stella was asleep, sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop and the coffee that was going cold. The consulting firm had since dissolved, but the equipment that had been shipped to it in 2009, the equipment meant for comprehensive neural pathway mapping, had a return shipment recorded 14 days later, unopened. The equipment had never been used. He stared at the screen for a long time. He didn't want to be wrong about this. He especially didn't want to be wrong in a way that handed Olivia a different kind of pain. The kind that came from believing something had been done to you deliberately when it was really just incompetence or logistics or a chain of small human errors. He looked at it again from every angle he could access. The shipment records were clear. The equipment was returned. The assessment had been billed to a private account, one he couldn't fully trace because the consulting firm's records had been archived into a data structure that he didn't have access to. But the billing records he could see showed a fee paid to a neurologist whose name appeared twice in Olivia's file as a secondary consultant. He didn't want to call her at 11:30 at night. He sat with it until midnight and then called her anyway, because she was the kind of person who needed to know things, and this was something she needed to know. She answered on the second ring. "Logan, were you asleep?" "No, what happened?" He told her carefully, the way he always told her things, without dramatizing, without certainty beyond what the evidence actually supported, laying it flat. The equipment shipment, the return record, the billing, the neurologist's name. The silence on her end was longer than usual. "The assessment was in October 2009, she said. Her voice was very controlled. "I remember it. I flew to Boston. I was there for 2 days. They told me they'd run every relevant test. The neural pathway mapping equipment was delivered and returned unused," Logan said. "That doesn't prove deliberate omission. It could be that they had their own equipment and the shipment was redundant. It could be..." "Who paid for the assessment?" Olivia said. Logan hesitated. "I don't have full access to the billing records, but from what I can see..." "Logan." Her voice was still controlled, but there was something underneath it now, something hard and pressurized. "Who commissioned the assessment?" He looked at his screen. The partial billing record had an account code he'd been able to partially decode through the Meridian records. The account was flagged as a corporate client referral. The corporate client had a code he recognized from the Kensington Group's vendor records. "It came through a Kensington Group account," he said. "I can't tell you which one or who authorized it from here, but the assessment was commissioned and paid for through a Kensington Group corporate account." Another silence. Longer. "My father was alive in 2009, Olivia said. Logan said nothing. "He died in 2010, she said. "He spent my whole childhood trying to find a way to fix this. By 2009, he would have been..." She stopped. "I don't know what he would have been. I don't know what that means. I don't know if it means anything." "You need someone who can access the full records," Logan said. "An attorney. Someone who can subpoena the archived documents from the consulting firm. I can only see the surface of this." "I know." She was quiet. "I know. I just..." A sharp exhale. "I need a minute." "Take it," he said. He sat at his kitchen table and waited, listening to the sound of her breathing on the other end, which was not calm exactly, but was deliberate. The sound of someone choosing to stay in control of herself. "Why would he do that?" she said finally, and the question was not really for Logan, or not only for him. "He spent every year from when I was 8 years old trying to fix this. He hired everyone. He tried everything. Why would he... In 2009, why would he commission an assessment and then..." She stopped again. "I don't know," Logan said, "and I don't think you should assume the worst until you can see the full records. There could be an explanation." "There could be," she said, "but there might not be." "Yeah," he said, "there might not be." She was quiet for a long time. He stayed on the line and let her be quiet, which was what she needed, which he understood without her asking. He loved me, she said finally. Whatever this is, and I don't know what it is yet. He loved me, I know that. I know, Logan said. I'm going to need a lawyer with archival subpoena access, she said, and her voice had shifted back to the thing he recognized, clear and functional and oriented toward action. And I'm not going to tell Tanaka or Bernard yet. I don't want this to touch the rehab until I know what I'm actually dealing with. That makes sense. This could be nothing, she said. An equipment error, a redundant shipment, a perfectly innocent administrative chain. It could be, Logan said, but you don't think it is. He looked at the screen again. At the neat, clean record of equipment delivered, assessed, and returned unopened. At the billing code. At the date in October 2009, 14 months before Richard Kensington's fatal heart attack. I don't know, he said, but I think you need to find out. She retained the attorney the next morning, a woman named Farida Solis, who handled corporate records litigation and had the specific kind of methodical tenacity that the situation required. Farida filed for the archived records the same week, and the waiting period for the subpoena processing was 3 to 5 weeks, which meant 3 to 5 weeks of Olivia knowing there was a thing she didn't know yet and wasn't able to know yet, which was its own particular kind of difficulty. She managed it the way she managed most difficult things, by working. The board situation with Helen was developing exactly as she'd predicted. Marcus had identified 3 secondary shareholders who'd been in private conversations with Helen's office, and Olivia had initiated direct outreach to each of them with data that made the restructuring proposal look significantly less appealing than Helen had apparently been characterizing it. She prepared for the Q4 earnings presentation with the same precision she brought to every external-facing performance, because external-facing performance was something she was genuinely good at, regardless of what was happening elsewhere. She went to her sessions with Bernard 3 days a week and pushed through the evenings when the resensitization kept her awake, and told herself that what she was looking for in the records was information, not absolution, not an explanation that would make sense of a childhood spent in a hospital and a life organized around a conclusion that may or may not have been fully earned. One Thursday, 4 weeks into the waiting period, something happened in the session that made Bernard stop writing and just look at her. She had been working on standing tolerance, the parallel bars, both hands gripping, weight shifted forward, and the protocol called for 10-second intervals, hold, and release. She had been working at it for 40 minutes, which was 15 minutes longer than any previous session, and she was tired in a deep, physical way that was distinct from the tired she knew from 30 years of upper body exertion. On the 11th interval, she felt her right leg take weight. Not fully, not cleanly. The leg shook, the ankle angle was wrong, and she gripped the bars hard enough that her knuckles ached. But for approximately 4 seconds, her right leg held a portion of her own body weight, and she felt it, not as the noise sensation of the early sessions, but as real pressure, real load, bone and muscle doing what they were built for. She started shaking and could not stop. That's okay, Bernard said from close by. That's completely okay. Let yourself shake. I'm not, she started, because she was going to say she was not the kind of person who shook, and then she couldn't continue the sentence because it wasn't true anymore. 4 seconds, Bernard said. You felt it? I felt it. We'll build on it. She held the bars and let herself shake, which was not something she would have allowed 3 months ago. And the shaking was not weakness, and she understood that now in a way she hadn't then. It was the body handling something real, something enormous, something that changed the story. She called Logan from the car. She didn't have words for it yet, so she just said, "My leg took weight today." And he said, "Olivia," in a voice that didn't have anything else in it, just her name, and that was enough. The records arrived on a Wednesday morning in January, and Farida Solis called Olivia at 8:45 while Olivia was already at her desk, which was where she'd been since 6:15 because sleep had become something that required more effort than it used to, and she'd stopped forcing it. I've reviewed everything, Farida said, without preamble, because Olivia had told her at the outset that she did not want preamble. I want to go through it with you in person. Can you come to my office today? How bad is it? A pause. Not a dramatic one. Farida was not a dramatic person, but a considered one, the pause of someone selecting words with care. "It's complicated," she said. "There are things in here that are going to be hard to read. I'd rather walk you through them than have you read them alone." Olivia looked out the window. January in New York was gray and flat, the kind of cold that didn't announce itself dramatically, but just sat on everything. "I'll be there at noon," she said. She told Marcus she had a legal consultation and not to schedule anything until 3. He didn't ask questions, which was one of the things she valued most about him. Farida's office was in Midtown, 8 blocks south, on a floor that smelled like old paper, and the particular kind of quiet that accumulates in places where difficult information regularly changes hands. Farida was at her desk with the archived documents organized in 3 separate folders, color-coded in a way that suggested she had been sorting through them for most of the previous day. She walked Olivia through them methodically. The first folder contained the 2009 assessment records from the Boston consulting firm, the full internal documentation, not the summary report that Olivia had received at the time. The second folder contained billing records. The third contained correspondence. It was the correspondence that was difficult. The neurologist who had conducted the 2009 assessment was named Dr. Philip Hartwell. He was retired now, in his late 70s, and based on the archived correspondence, he had communicated extensively with Richard Kensington's personal executive assistant during the 2 months prior to Olivia's evaluation. The emails were formal and careful in the way that suggested both parties understood the weight of what they were discussing. The content was this: Richard Kensington had engaged Dr. Hartwell not to conduct an open-ended comprehensive assessment of Olivia's neural pathway status, but to confirm a specific conclusion. The language in the initial engagement letter was precise enough to be almost admirable in its clarity. What Richard wanted was a definitive final assessment that would allow Olivia to close the chapter on treatment possibilities and focus her considerable abilities on building her life and her career. He believed that continued hope for physical recovery was preventing Olivia from accepting her circumstances and achieving the psychological stability he felt she needed. He had paid to be told one final time that there was nothing to find, and Dr. Hartwell, whether out of professional agreement or financial motivation or some combination of the two, had structured the evaluation accordingly. The neural pathway mapping equipment, the kind that might have identified exactly what Tanaka's current imaging had shown, had been delivered to the facility and returned unused. The assessment had been conducted using the older methodology, the same one that had already been used 7 times before, and had reached the same conclusion. Olivia sat across from Farida and read the correspondence twice. She was not shaking. She had used up her shaking apparently in Bernard's rehabilitation room in December, because now she felt very still and very cold in a way that was not temperature. "He loved me," she said when she was done. It was the same thing she'd said to Logan 3 weeks ago on the phone at midnight, and it was still true, and it still didn't resolve anything. "From everything in these records," Farida said carefully, "it's clear that he believed he was acting in your best interest. The correspondence with his personal assistant includes references to watching you struggle after previous treatments that failed. He wrote," she found the page, "that he couldn't watch her hope and lose anymore, that the hope itself was the thing destroying her." Olivia looked at that sentence for a long time. "He was wrong," she said. "Yes," Farida said, "he was wrong. He thought he was protecting me. Yes. And he took the decision out of my hands." Her voice was still flat, still controlled, but there was something underneath it that she was managing with considerable effort. "At 31 years old, he decided I couldn't be trusted to handle the possibility. He decided the kindest thing was to make the decision for me." She set the page down. "And then he died. And I spent 13 more years in that chair running a company and thinking I'd made peace with something that didn't need to be made peace with." Farida let her sit with it. She didn't try to redirect or reframe, just let the weight of it occupy the room for a moment without rushing to clear it away. "What are my options?" Olivia asked finally. "Dr. Hartwell is retired, but he holds an active medical license. There's a case to be made to the medical board. Whether you want to pursue that is entirely your decision, and I won't advocate for either direction." Farida folded her hands. What I would say is that the record is now documented and preserved. Whatever you choose to do with it, you have it. Olivia nodded. She took the third folder, the correspondence, and held it in her lap. I need a few days with this, she said. Of course. She left Farida's office and sat in the back of her car and did not direct her driver anywhere for 6 minutes. Just sat with the folder on her lap and the city going about its business outside the window, everyone moving with the particular winter urgency of people who needed to be somewhere warm. She thought about her father. Not the CEO, not the empire builder, not the man who had hired 12 specialists over 15 years, but the specific man she remembered from before the accident, who used to take her to the park on Sunday mornings and let her ride on his shoulders, and who had, by her account, genuinely fallen apart when she woke up in that hospital bed at 8 years old. She thought about what it must have felt like, in 2009, to watch a daughter who'd been through a dozen failed treatments make herself into something extraordinary anyway, to look at her and decide that hope was the enemy, that the most loving thing you could do was close the door. He had been wrong, and he had loved her. Both of those things were completely and permanently true, and she was going to have to figure out how to live inside that without letting it destroy something she'd spent the last 3 months building. She told her driver to go. She called Logan that evening. She'd thought about not telling him, thought about managing this one privately, the way she managed most things privately. And then she thought about what he'd said to her in early October, standing in her office over a shipping manifest. I just said what I saw. She'd trusted him with the small version of the truth then, and the medium version, and now she trusted him with the real version. She told him everything, the engagement letter, the returned equipment, the sentence about not watching her hope and lose anymore. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment, not the careful quiet of someone formulating a response, but the genuine quiet of someone affected by what they'd just heard. I'm sorry, he said. Don't, not because you need sympathy, because it's a genuinely terrible thing to find out, and you should hear someone say that out loud. A pause. He took something from you. He did, she said. I've been sitting with that all day. And I keep landing in the same place. He thought he was being merciful. He was wrong, and he was selfish, and he was also trying to protect his daughter, and all three of those things are true at the same time. She exhaled. I can't be angry at him the way I would need to be angry at a stranger. He's my father. He's been dead for 13 years. What I can do is not let it define what happens next. That's a harder thing than it sounds. I know. She shifted in her chair. I keep thinking about the conversation with Helen, about that 30 seconds in the conference room when she made me doubt whether I should keep going. And I think my father spent the last year of his life, maybe longer, trying to talk himself into believing that taking this from me was the kind thing. And if I stop now, if I let what he did become the reason I stop, then he was right. Not intentionally right, but right anyway. Logan was quiet again, and then he said, You're not going to stop. No, she said, I'm not. Good. She almost left it there. But there was one more thing, and she found she needed to say it. I don't know how to explain why I keep telling you these things, she said. You're not... we met over a shipping manifest. You're a contract freight worker. I'm aware that's a bizarre sentence. It is kind of a bizarre sentence, Logan said. I have a therapist. I have Tanaka and Bernard. I have Marcus and a legal counsel. I have resources. She paused. And I call you. Do you want me to tell you why? No, she said. Yes, maybe. She could hear him thinking about it the way he thought about most things, actually thinking, not reaching. I think, he said slowly, because I don't need anything from you. Every other person in your life is either someone you employ or someone you're accountable to or someone whose feelings about you you're managing. I'm a guy who noticed your foot move. I don't have a stake in the outcome. She considered that. You have more of a stake than you're giving yourself credit for, she said. You're the reason any of this started. Maybe, he said, but I'm not trying to protect my investment. I'm just here. Here. Such a plain word. She'd heard it 1,000 times in 1,000 contexts, and it had never landed quite the way it landed now. Your daughter, Olivia said. How is she? The shift didn't surprise him. He'd learned by now that she changed subjects when something got too close, and he let her change it. She started chess club at school, he said. She's already convinced that everyone else is playing it wrong. She might be right. She might be. She's been making me play with her every night after dinner, and she's actually good. She doesn't just react, she plans ahead, thinks 3 moves out. He paused, and she heard the specific warmth in it, the thing that happened in his voice when he talked about Stella. Dana was like that, strategic. You'd think she was doing one thing and she was actually doing something else entirely. Olivia was quiet for a moment. He didn't talk about Dana often, not because the subject was forbidden, but because it came up when it came up, and he didn't perform grief and didn't hide it either. She sounds like she was exceptional, Olivia said. She was difficult and funny and absolutely certain she was right about everything, Logan said. So yeah, exceptional. 3 days after she read the records, Olivia went to see her mother. Eleanor Kensington was 71 and lived in a house in Connecticut that she'd moved to after Richard died. A large, quiet house with a garden that she tended with the focused, unhurried attention she'd never quite had time for during the years of corporate life and specialist appointments, and the relentless forward motion of a family defined by its capacity to deal with things. Olivia hadn't told her mother she was coming. She'd simply driven up on a Saturday morning, which was something she almost never did. She called, she scheduled, she managed the relationship with the same structure she brought to everything. Showing up unannounced was not part of her repertoire. Eleanor opened the door and looked at her daughter for a moment without speaking. Then she stepped back and held the door open. They sat in the kitchen with coffee that Eleanor made herself because she never used the pod machine Richard had bought and used to call modern progress. And the kitchen was warm and smelled like whatever she'd been baking that morning. And Olivia sat across from her mother at the table where she'd eaten 1,000 meals growing up and said, I need to tell you what I found. She told her, all of it. Her mother sat across from her and listened with very still hands and a face that went through things that Olivia tried not to analyze too closely, because Eleanor Kensington's face when it was managing something difficult was a private thing that deserved to be treated as private. When Olivia finished, her mother was quiet for a long time. I didn't know, Eleanor said. I believe you. I knew he was... She stopped. By 2009, he was frightened. Not of losing the company, of watching you. He told me once that he thought he was running out of ways to fix things, and that maybe trying to fix things was making it worse. I didn't understand what he meant. I thought he was talking about his own emotional state. She looked at her coffee cup. I didn't understand what he was planning. He thought he was being kind, Olivia said. He was wrong. Yes. Eleanor looked up. Are you angry? Yes, Olivia said, in layers. I'm angry at him, and I'm angry at the neurologist, and I'm angry at myself for accepting the conclusion without pushing harder, and then I'm angry at myself for that anger because I was 31, and I'd already been through it 11 times, and I had every reason to believe it was over. She wrapped both hands around her mug. And underneath all of that, I understand why he did it, which is the hardest part. Her mother reached across the table and put her hand over Olivia's. It was a simple gesture, and Eleanor was not a physically demonstrative person as a general rule, which made it mean more rather than less. The rehab is working, Olivia said. My leg took weight in December. We're building on it. Eleanor pressed her hand. Tell me what it felt like, she said. When your leg took weight. Tell me exactly. And Olivia did. She sat at her mother's kitchen table on a Saturday morning in January and described the parallel bars and the shaking and Bernard's voice saying, let yourself shake, and the way 4 seconds could feel like a complete rearrangement of everything you knew. And her mother sat across from her and listened with the specific concentrated attention of a woman who had been waiting for this story for 30 years without knowing she was still waiting for it. February was brutal in a different way than January. The board situation came to a head in the second week. Helen had been unable to gain traction with the secondary shareholders. Olivia's direct outreach had been effective, but Helen was not the kind of person who accepted a closed door and moved on. She escalated by requesting a full board review of Olivia's executive performance, which was within her rights as a founding board member, and which was, by every objective measure, something Olivia had nothing to fear from. That didn't make sitting through it less grim. The review was a 3-hour process involving a third-party governance consultant who asked systematic questions about decision-making during the prior fiscal year, delegation patterns, response times, major strategic calls. Olivia answered everything cleanly and accurately because there was nothing inaccurate to say. The company had performed well, the major strategic decisions had been sound. The only thing that had changed in her operational approach was a reduction in personal hours in the office, which was offset by an increase in efficiency. The governance consultant's preliminary report, delivered 2 weeks later, found no significant concerns with executive performance. Helen received this information and appeared, at least externally, to accept it. Olivia didn't trust the appearance for a second, but there was nothing left to move against in the immediate term, so she filed it, maintained her monitoring of the secondary shareholder communications, and went back to work. The rehab, meanwhile, was entering what Bernard called the consolidation phase, building on the functional motor gains from December and January, increasing standing tolerance, beginning very preliminary weight-shifting work between the bars. It was meticulous and slow, and frequently frustrating in the specific way that progress that should feel enormous manages to feel insufficient because it's measured in inches against a deficit of miles. She fell twice in February. The first time was during a weight-shifting exercise when her right leg buckled at the ankle and she went sideways, catching herself on the bar, but not completely, ending up half on the mat with her shoulder taking the impact. Bernard was beside her immediately, professional and calm, and she was fine. The shoulder was sore for 2 days, but nothing structural, and she told herself it was data. A fall was information. It told her where the weakness was. The second fall was worse because it happened at the end of a session when she was tired and her attention had drifted, and she went forward instead of sideways, and Bernard caught most of it, but not all of it, and she ended up on the mat with her face pressed against the plastic surface and a pain in her wrist that turned out to be a minor sprain. She lay on the mat for a moment without moving, not because she was hurt beyond the wrist, but because she was tired in a way that the mat seemed like a reasonable place to be tired. "Take a minute," Bernard said from beside her. "I'm fine." "I know. Take a minute anyway." She took the minute. She lay on the mat and stared at the acoustic tiles on the ceiling and thought about the archived correspondence and Helen's board review and the 2 in the morning nights and Stella asking her father the weight of everything. And she thought about whether she had the amount of something required to keep going, which was a question she'd never had to ask herself about anything before and which she resented having to ask now. She got up. It took effort and her wrist ached, and it was not graceful. She got up. "Good," Bernard said, and handed her a towel. She told Logan about the falls that evening. She almost didn't. The impulse to protect the narrative of progress, to present only the advancing version of the story, was deeply habitual, and she had to consciously override it. "How bad was the second one?" he asked. "Sprained wrist. It's wrapped." "Are you, I'm fine," she said. "I got up. I finished the session." "I know you did," he said. "I'm asking if you're okay, not whether you finished the session. Those are different questions." She sat with that. "I'm okay," she said. "I had a minute on the mat where I wasn't sure how much I had left, and then I got up and I was okay." "What got you up?" She thought about it honestly. "I don't know exactly. Refusal, maybe. I don't have a more precise answer than that." "Refusal is enough," Logan said. "Is it?" "It got you off the mat." She looked at her wrapped wrist. Outside, February was doing what February did, being relentless and gray and showing no signs of finishing. "I want to ask you something," she said, "and I want you to answer honestly, not reassuringly. Okay? Do you think I can do this?" He didn't answer immediately, which was the thing she'd learned to value most about him, the refusal to reach for the easy answer just because she'd asked for one. "I think," he said carefully, "that you have functional motor pathways that nobody knew existed for 30 years. I think you've made measurable gains in 5 months that your team didn't predict. I think you get off mats." A pause. "And I think that the question of whether you can do it isn't really what you're asking me." "What am I asking?" Whether it's worth the cost, he said. Whether the version of yourself on the other side of this, whatever that version looks like, is worth everything it's taking to get there. She was quiet for a long moment. Yes, she said. It is. She heard him exhale. Then you already have your answer, he said. You just needed to say it out loud. She looked at her wrapped wrist again, at the city outside, at the long gray February that would eventually become something else. Logan, she said. Yeah. Thank you. She said it plainly, without qualification, without redirecting afterward. Just the two words set down flat. He was quiet for a moment. You don't have to thank me for being here, he said. I know, she said. I'm thanking you anyway. March came in cold and then broke open into something tentative and gray-green, the specific quality of early spring in New York that doesn't quite commit to being warm but stops pretending it's still winter. Olivia noticed it from the car on the way to Columbia one morning, the trees along Riverside Drive putting out the first small leaves, cautious and pale, like they weren't sure yet whether it was safe. She understood that feeling exactly. 8 months had passed since the morning Logan had stood in her office with a shipping manifest and said quietly and without drama, "Your foot moved." 8 months was not a long time in most contexts. In this one, it felt like a different life. The EMG data from January showed motor pathway activity in 4 distinct muscle groups that had registered as absent on every scan she'd had since 2002. Bernard had moved her from standing tolerance work to assisted ambulation, forearm crutches, his hand at her elbow, the parallel bars retired to a supporting role. She was walking, not easily, not well by any standard that didn't account for where she'd started. Her gait was labored and asymmetrical, the right side stronger than the left, and she needed the crutches, and she needed Bernard, and she needed the 20 minutes of rest afterward when her legs shook with exertion and her whole lower body felt like it had been asked to run a marathon with no prior training, which was functionally not far from the truth. But she was moving under her own power, her own feet touching the ground, her own weight passing through her own legs, and the first time it happened, she had not laughed the way she'd laughed at the knee extension in December. She had simply been silent. The kind of silence that doesn't mean absence, but means the opposite. Too full to make sound. She hadn't told anyone at the company. Not Marcus, not the board, not Helen, who had been quietly reduced in organizational influence following the governance review and was now managing the situation with the particular dignity of someone recalibrating their position without conceding it. Olivia kept the rehab separate from everything professional, a clean line she'd drawn in October and maintained because she needed one part of her life that wasn't subject to institutional scrutiny. She told Logan. She told her mother. She told Tanaka and Bernard, obviously, and Farida Solis, who knew most of the relevant context anyway. That was the complete list. She'd kept it small, which was how she kept things that mattered most. The question of Dr. Philip Hartwell had been sitting in a folder on Farida's desk since January, unresolved. Olivia thought about it often, in the specific way you think about a decision you've already made somewhere underneath the conscious level but haven't yet said out loud. She thought about it on the nights when the resensitization kept her awake, and on the mornings when she sat in the car watching the city and calculating what it had cost to be 32 years in that chair when 22 of those years might have been something different. She thought about the sentence in her father's engagement letter. The hope itself was the thing destroying her, and about how precisely wrong a person could be while trying to do right. She called Farida in the 3rd week of March. "I'm not filing with the medical board," she said. Farida was quiet for a moment. "Can I ask why?" "Because Hartwell is 77 and retired, and he made a decision 17 years ago under the direction of a client who is dead. Filing would take 2 years, produce a reprimand he's never going to professionally feel, and cost me time and attention that I'm currently spending on something more important." She paused. "And because I don't want my recovery to be organized around punishment, I want it to be organized around what comes next." "That's a considered position," Farida said. "I've had 3 months to consider it." "What do you want to do with the records?" "Keep them," Olivia said. "Preserved and documented. If it ever becomes relevant, if he treats another patient, if something surfaces, the record exists, but I'm not initiating anything." She put the phone down and sat with the decision for a moment, checking it the way she checked most important decisions, looking for the place where doubt lived. She didn't find one. The decision had the solid feel of something arrived at honestly, rather than something that required maintenance. She forwarded the instruction to Farida in writing and moved on. Them. She met Stella for the first time on a Saturday in late March. It hadn't been formally arranged. Logan had mentioned in passing that he was taking Stella to the Natural History Museum on Saturday. Her school was doing a unit on prehistoric animals, and she'd decided she needed to see the actual bones. And Olivia had said, without quite planning to, that she'd been meaning to go there and hadn't been in years. The invitation that followed was casual and slightly uncertain, the way invitations sound when someone is making them up as they go, and she'd accepted in the same register. She'd told herself it was just the museum. Stella was waiting outside the main entrance on Central Park West with Logan, her hand in his, wearing a red coat and the expression of someone who had places to be. She was small and bright-eyed, and when Logan introduced them, she looked at Olivia with the direct, assessing attention of a child who hadn't yet learned to disguise it. "You're the one Dad knows from work," Stella said. "That's right," Olivia said. "He said you were smart." "Did he?" Logan looked at the sky. "Shall we go in?" They went in. Olivia had been to the Natural History Museum many times, but always as a donor, always for evening events where the Great Hall was draped in something and everyone wore black tie and the bones were backdrop. She had never been there the ordinary way, on a Saturday morning with crowds of children and the particular energy of a museum that is genuinely in use. She'd forgotten what that felt like. Stella moved through the Hall of Dinosaurs with the specific intensity of a person on a research mission. She asked questions that were better than most adult questions Olivia had encountered. Not what is this, but why did this stop existing? And how do they know this bone goes here and not there? Logan answered the ones he could and said, "I don't know, let's find out for the rest." And Olivia found herself watching them more than the exhibits. They stopped in front of the Brachiosaurus cast, enormous and still, neck reaching toward the ceiling. Stella stood at the railing and looked up at it for a long time without saying anything. "It was alive," Stella said finally. "It was actually here, on the actual ground." "About 150 million years ago," Olivia said. Stella turned to look at her. "Does that feel like a long time to you?" Olivia considered it. "Right now? Not particularly." Stella seemed to accept this as a reasonable answer and turned back to the Brachiosaurus. Logan was standing beside Olivia, close enough that she was aware of it without it being conspicuous. "She does that thing," he said quietly, "where she gets very still in front of something that overwhelms her. She's done it since she was 3. "It's a good thing to do," Olivia said. "Most people fill the overwhelm with noise." He looked at her briefly. "Yeah," he said, "they do." Later, at the cafe on the lower level, Stella having negotiated this with the strategic determination of someone who had planned it from the beginning, they sat with hot chocolate and coffee and a muffin that Stella was dissecting with scientific interest while explaining her theory that the chocolate chips were unevenly distributed as a form of quality control measure. "I think it's random," Logan said. "Nothing is random," Stella said with absolute certainty. Olivia laughed. "A real one, the involuntary kind." Stella looked at her with mild surprise, as if laughter was an unexpected but acceptable outcome. "She's going to be terrifying when she's an adult," Olivia said. "I know," Logan said. "I'm already preparing myself." Stella, having finished her analysis of the muffin distribution, turned her attention to Olivia with the directness that seemed to be her default mode. "My dad says you've been sick," she said. Logan opened his mouth. "He said you've been working on getting better," Stella continued, undeflected. "For a long time." Olivia looked at the child, at the careful, unvarnished attention in her face. She thought about all the things she'd learned in the past 8 months about what it meant to be looked at without pity or agenda, and she recognized the quality of Stella's attention as something in the same family. "That's right," Olivia said. "For a long time." "Is it working?" "Yes," Olivia said. "It's working." Stella nodded, satisfied. "Good," she said, and went back to the muffin. Logan caught Olivia's eye over Stella's head. He had a look on his face that she didn't fully have a word for yet. Not quite apology for the directness, not quite pride in the directness, something that held both and was mostly just him. She held the look for a moment and then looked at her coffee, and the warmth in her chest was something she was done trying to categorize. The real conversation happened in April. Not a planned one. Those tended to go sideways for them. The times they'd tried to be deliberate about it, the way people do when they sense something approaching and try to manage its arrival. What actually happened was a Tuesday evening when Logan stopped by to drop off a shipping document that Olivia had requested, something she could easily have had couriered, a fact that she didn't examine too closely, and ended up at the kitchen counter of her apartment for the first time, because she'd offered coffee and he'd stayed. The apartment was not what he'd expected, he said, looking around. What did you expect? More, I don't know, architecture, like the office. The office is the office, she said. This is where I actually live. It was different from the office, warmer, less curated, the bookshelves genuinely used and not decorative, a throw on the sofa that was soft from washing. The kitchen counter had a crack in it that hadn't been repaired, and the art on the walls was personal rather than impressive. It looked like a place where someone ate cereal at midnight and didn't always make the bed. He sat on the stool at the counter and she made coffee, and they talked about nothing particular for 20 minutes before the conversation shifted. The way conversations do when the small talk has done its job and the real thing is ready to surface. I want to tell you something, Logan said. He was looking at his coffee cup. And I want to say it without making it into something complicated, because I'm not good at complicated. Olivia set down her mug. Okay. I think about you all the time, he said. Not about the rehab, not about how it's going. Just you. I think about you the way you think about a person who has become important to you. He looked up. I don't know exactly when that happened, sometime around October. And I've been letting it sit without saying it because you have enough happening and I didn't want to add weight to that. But I'm tired of not saying it. She was quiet for a moment. You're not adding weight, she said. Olivia, I think about you too, she said. I've been aware of it for months. I don't do things like this. I don't let people... She stopped and restarted on firmer ground. It's not that I don't want to. It's that I don't know how to do it without immediately calculating the risk. What's the risk? She looked at him. At the face she'd been looking at across phones and through glass walls and over shipping manifests for 8 months, that had become as familiar as anything in her daily life. That it matters, she said, and then something goes wrong. And I've spent my whole life being careful about the things that matter, because the ones that matter are the ones that cost the most when they... I know, he said. I know that. I know that better than almost anyone. He set his cup down on the counter. Dana mattered, and it cost more than I can fully explain. And I thought for a long time that maybe the lesson was not to let things matter that much. He paused. But I have a 7-year-old who asks the weight of everything and plays chess like she's already 3 moves ahead, and she needs me to show her what it looks like to choose things that matter. So, the kitchen was very quiet. Outside, April was wet and warm, and the window was cracked open, and the sound of the city came through it, steady and indifferent, and somehow comforting in its constancy. I don't know how to do this normally, Olivia said. I don't have a template for it. Most of my relationships are managed, even my personal ones. You've been calling me at 11 o'clock at night from rehab parking lots for 8 months, Logan said. I'd argue the template is already there. She considered that. It was accurate, and it made her want to smile, which she did. Not managed, just a smile. Fair point, she said. He reached across the counter and put his hand over hers, the same way her mother had done at the kitchen table in Connecticut in January. And it was not the same gesture, but it had the same quality. Simple, without argument, just presence confirmed. She turned her hand over, held his. They stayed like that for a while, in the warm kitchen with the window cracked and the city outside and the coffee going cold, which she was used to by now, which neither of them noticed. The morning Olivia walked without the crutches was in May. Not a scheduled event, not a planned milestone. Bernard had told her in April that they were approaching the point where it was worth trying, that the strengthening data suggested the pathway integrity was sufficient, that the next step in the protocol was to test unassisted ambulation in the controlled environment of the rehab room. He'd said they'd try it in the next few weeks and build up to it gradually. What actually happened was that on a Tuesday in the second week of May, Olivia stood at the parallel bars and picked up the crutches and set them against the wall. Bernard looked at her. She looked at him. "Not yet," he said. "I want to try," she said. He studied her for a moment with the evaluating attention that had become so familiar over the past 7 months that it no longer felt clinical. Then he positioned himself 2 feet in front of her, arms out. 3 steps, he said. "If you get 3, that's the session." She let go of the bars. The first step was bad. Too much weight on the right, her left ankle rolling inward, and she grabbed the bar immediately and reset. She stood still and breathed and tried again. The second attempt was different, deliberate. She shifted her weight the way Bernard had shown her in 100 sessions, thought about the mechanics of it, thought about nothing, and stepped forward with her left foot and then her right and then her left again. And Bernard's hands were hovering near her elbows but not touching them, and she did not fall. She stopped. 3 steps. Roughly 6 feet, under her own power, her own legs, nothing holding her up but the body she'd been told for 30 years couldn't do this. She stood still for a moment that felt much longer than it was. Bernard was very quiet. The room was very quiet. The acoustic tiles on the ceiling were exactly what they'd always been, and the floor under her feet was the same rehabilitation mat she'd been working on since October, and nothing about the room had changed except that she was standing in the middle of it, and she had walked there. She didn't cry. She thought she might, and then she didn't because the feeling was too large for crying, had moved past the territory where tears were the appropriate response into something that didn't have a common expression. She stood in the middle of the mat and felt the floor under her feet and breathed. "Okay," Bernard said after a while. "Yeah," she said. "That was more than 3 steps." "I know." He retrieved the crutches and helped her sit because her legs were shaking with the effort and would be for a while, and she sat on the mat and let them shake. He sat beside her, and neither of them said anything for several minutes. Then Bernard, who was measured and clinical and had spent 7 months showing exactly appropriate professional enthusiasm, made a sound that was unmistakably him trying not to lose composure entirely. "Don't you start," Olivia said. "I'm not starting anything," he said, his voice slightly wrong. "You absolutely are." "Shut up," he said, which was not something he'd ever said to her before. And it made her laugh, which made him laugh, and they sat on the mat together and let it be what it was. She called Logan from the parking lot. She sat in the back of the car and called him before she told anyone else, before she called her mother, before she said anything to Tanaka who was going to want a full report. She called Logan because he was the first one. He had been the first one from the beginning, standing in her office with a shipping manifest, saying, "I just said what I saw," and she wanted him to know. "Logan," she said when he picked up. Something in her voice must have reached him immediately because he said, "What happened?" And it wasn't a question, it was a hand reaching across the space between them. "I walked," she said. The silence was exactly as long as it needed to be, and not a second longer. "Olivia," he said. 6 feet, she said, without the crutches. By myself. She heard him exhale, slow, complete, the breath of someone who has been holding something for a long time and is only now putting it down. 6 feet, he said. "The mat is very ugly," she said. "I was looking at it the whole time, focusing on the mat, and I thought—" She stopped because this was the part she hadn't planned on saying. "I thought about October, about you in my office looking at my foot, about how close I came to dismissing you. You were a stranger with a shipping invoice, and I almost just sent you away." "You didn't," he said. "No," she said. "I didn't." She looked out the car window at the May afternoon, which was warm and specific and had the quality of a day that would be easy to remember. "Come to dinner tonight," she said. "Bring Stella. I'll cook something." A pause. "You cook?" "Badly," she said. "I'm an excellent CEO and a genuinely mediocre cook. Fair warning." She could hear him smiling. "We'll be there at 7, he said. Bansen. What Olivia understood, in the months that followed, was that the story she'd been living wasn't actually about walking. That sounds like the kind of thing you'd say to make a defeat bearable, reframing the loss, finding the consolation, covering the wound with meaning. She'd spent 30 years watching people do that with her situation, and she'd found it condescending every single time. So she was careful about it, the way she was careful about most things, checking it from different angles before she trusted it. But it held. The walking was real. She worked at it through the spring and into the summer, building distance and stability in increments that were painstaking and irregular, some weeks gaining, some weeks plateauing. One bad week in June when she strained a ligament in her left knee and had to drop back to the crutches for 10 days, which was its own specific kind of grief. By August, she could walk the length of a city block with forearm crutches and 200 meters without them on a good day, which Tanaka described in careful, honest terms as a remarkable outcome that exceeded what she had permitted herself to predict in October. The wheelchair was still there. She still used it. Some days were crutches days, some days were walking days, some days were chair days because her body had its own schedule and she was learning to negotiate with it rather than override it, which was a skill she'd had to learn almost entirely from scratch. The chair wasn't defeat. It was a tool. It had always been a tool. She just knew now that it wasn't the whole story. She stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her 42nd floor office in late August and looked out at the city, the harbor to the south, Brooklyn to the east, the whole particular skyline of it that she'd been looking at since she was 26 years old, and she thought about what it had taken to get to that window. Not the physical part, though the physical part was enormous. The other part. The part where a person decides to let the chapter that was supposed to be closed get reopened, with all the risk and exposure and possible costs that entails. The hardest thing, she'd decided, was not the resensitization or the falls or the 2 a.m. nights when her nervous system was processing things that had been dormant for 3 decades. The hardest thing was learning to tolerate possibility again, because possibility, unlike certainty, has no floor. Certainty, even terrible certainty, has a floor. You know where you stand. Possibility means you don't know, which means you can fall, which means every day is a choice to keep your footing on ground that might not hold. She'd spent 30 years standing on the solid floor of This Is Finished, and she had been extraordinary on that floor. She'd built an $11 billion company on that floor. She'd run boardrooms and managed crises and outlasted every person who'd ever underestimated her on that floor. None of that was diminished by what came after. It was still true. It was still hers. But the floor had been someone else's decision, placed there by her father's grief, maintained by the accumulated authority of everyone who'd read her file and said permanent and sent her on her way. And the act of stepping off it, which was exactly what it felt like, that first session with Bernard, that first phone call to Logan from a rehab parking lot, was the most frightening and necessary thing she'd ever done. That was what she'd carry, not the 6 feet on the mat, though she'd carry that too. The decision to step off the floor. Done. The board was reshuffled in September. Olivia proposed the changes herself. A deliberate expansion of the governance structure that distributed certain oversight responsibilities in ways that reduced the organizational leverage of any single founding member. It was presented as a modernization initiative, which it was, and it passed with broad support, which she had ensured. Helen voted yes with the graceful acceptance of someone who understood when she'd lost and wasn't going to make it ugly. After the vote, Helen stopped Olivia in the hallway outside the boardroom. She looked at Olivia with the careful consideration of someone choosing between several possible approaches. "I heard you've been doing some work with a rehabilitation team at Columbia," Helen said. Olivia held her gaze. "I have. I understand it's been remarkable." A pause. Helen's expression did something complicated. "I owe you an apology for December, the things I implied." Olivia looked at her for a moment. Helen Marsh was not a good person in the way the term is usually applied, but she wasn't entirely dishonest, and the apology had the specific texture of something that had cost her something to arrive at. "Accepted," Olivia said. She didn't add anything to it. It wasn't that kind of relationship and wasn't going to become one. But it was the right word, and she meant it, and she walked. Crutches today. The rain made the left knee unreliable, away from the conversation without carrying it with her. Logan brought Stella to Olivia's apartment for dinner so many times through the summer that Stella had developed opinions about the kitchen, specifically about the crack in the counter, which she felt should be filled with something interesting, and about the cabinet where Olivia kept the baking supplies, which Stella had fully inventoried during a July evening when Olivia had made, at Stella's request, something that started as cookies and evolved into an unidentifiable but edible hybrid of brownie and oatmeal bar. "These are good," Stella had said, testing them with the same methodical rigor she brought to muffin analysis. "They were supposed to be cookies," Olivia said. "They're better than cookies," Stella said, which was generous and possibly strategic and also genuinely heartfelt, because Stella was all three of those things simultaneously as a general rule. Logan had watched the two of them from the other side of the kitchen counter. His daughter and this woman who had been a stranger 7 months ago and was now the person Stella requested by name when she wanted to know something her father couldn't answer. And he'd thought about Dana. Not with the complicated chest weight of the early months after the accident, but with something gentler. With gratitude, actually. For the daughter Dana had given him, the specific and extraordinary daughter who picked up oranges and asked their weight and beat him at chess and was currently explaining to Olivia her theory of optimal chocolate chip distribution as though it were an engineering problem requiring a solution. Dana would have liked Olivia. He was fairly certain of that. The certainty had a clean feel to it, the way certain things do when you've thought about them honestly rather than wishfully. He and Olivia had not labeled anything. They hadn't sat down and defined it with the vocabulary that people use to categorize relationships, and neither of them felt the urgency to, because the thing was already what it was, and naming it wasn't going to change its texture. What it was: two people who talked every day, who showed up for each other in the practical and unglamorous ways that constitute actual presence, who made each other laugh and told each other hard things, and sat in the same kitchen while a 7-year-old explained her theories about the universe. It was ordinary in the best way ordinary can be. On a Sunday in October, exactly 1 year by rough count, from the morning he'd stood in her office with the manifest, Logan and Stella came to pick Olivia up for a walk in Central Park. Not a therapy walk, not a measured distance rehabilitation exercise. Just a walk. Stella ran ahead on the path with the specific freedom of a child who has been promised open space, her red coat bright against the October trees. Olivia walked with the crutches, Logan beside her, their pace the particular unhurried kind that forms when two people have stopped trying to go anywhere faster than they can comfortably go together. "A year," he said. "More or less," she said. "How does it feel?" She thought about it while they walked. Stella had found something on the path. A leaf, enormous and rust-colored, and was holding it up to the light with the focused appreciation of a scientist or an artist. The distinction being, in her case, probably irrelevant. "It feels like I've been living in a house with a locked room," Olivia said, "and someone found the key. And the room wasn't—" She paused, looking for the accurate version. "It wasn't full of treasure. It was just another room. But I'd built the whole house around it being locked, and now the house is different. Not better or worse. Different." He was quiet for a moment, considering it. "Locked rooms tend to be the ones we organize everything else around," he said. "Yes," she said, "they do." Stella was still holding the leaf up to the light, turning it slowly. Logan watched his daughter, and Olivia watched Logan watch his daughter, and the park was doing its October thing, the smell of it, the particular slant of the afternoon light through the turning trees, the sounds of the city kept at a comfortable distance by the open space. "I need to tell you something," Olivia said. "Okay." "I'm starting a foundation for spinal injury rehabilitation access. The model Tanaka uses, the advanced pathway mapping, the neural retraining protocol. It's expensive and it's not covered by most insurance plans, and most people in the situation I was in don't have the resources I had." She kept her eyes on the path. "I could have died in that chair, figuratively, I mean, having no idea. Most people do. They're told the story is finished, and they believe it because they don't have the money to question it. I'm going to change that." Logan was quiet for a moment. "When did you decide this?" "January," she said. "When I read the records. But I've been planning it since April." She paused. "I'm naming it after my father. Not because I've forgiven everything fully. I'm still working on that part. but because I understand what he was afraid of. And I want something to exist in the world that answers the fear instead of surrendering to it. He didn't say anything for a while. They walked. Stella had moved further ahead and was now engaged in some taxonomy of fallen leaves that appeared to involve sorting them by color into two separate piles. He would have been proud of you, Logan said finally. For this, specifically. Maybe, Olivia said. He would have been complicated about it. He was always complicated. She smiled, and it was the kind that lives alongside grief rather than replacing it. I learned that from him too. Logan reached over and took her hand, not the crutch hand, the other one, and held it as they walked, which was something they'd been doing since April in the kitchen and had not yet found a reason to stop doing. Stella, from 20 feet ahead, turned around and observed this with the assessing attention she brought to everything. "Are you two holding hands?" she called. "Yes," Logan said. Stella considered this for a moment. "Okay," she said, and turned back to her leaves. Olivia laughed. The real kind, the involuntary kind, the best kind. Yeah. This is the thing about people who change your life. They almost never know they're doing it. They're just being themselves, honest or stubborn or attentive in ways that happen to be exactly what's needed at exactly the right time. There's no plan. There's no special qualification. Logan Brooks was a freight worker with a state engineering degree and a second-hand van and a daughter who counted everything. He was not a famous doctor or a motivational story or a person whose biography would have predicted this. He was a man who noticed something and said so. And that was the whole of it. What Olivia understood now, a year past the starting point, was that the miracle, if you want to call it that, and she didn't usually, but she'd earned the word, wasn't in her nervous system or in Tanaka's imaging technology or in the rehabilitation protocol that had woken up pathways dormant for 30 years. The miracle was simpler and much harder. It was the moment she didn't send him away. The moment she heard your foot moved and instead of closing the door, she left it open. Just barely. Just enough for the light to get in. Hope is not comfortable. It is the least comfortable of all the things you can choose. It asks you to stand on uncertain ground and keep standing, to build towards something that might not arrive, to tolerate the long middle stretch between the problem and the answer where you can't see the end and the cost is already real. She'd been right, all those years, to understand its weight. She'd been wrong to believe that the weight made it not worth carrying. The ground under her feet in Central Park on that October Sunday was just ground, dirt and roots, and the particular solidity of a thing that has been there long before you and will be there after. She felt it through the soles of her shoes, through the bones of her feet and ankles, and the legs that had learned in their late 30s to hold her. It was not a dramatic sensation. It was just contact. Just the ordinary fact of a body meeting the earth. For 30 years she hadn't had it. For 30 years that contact was something other people had, and she managed without. And standing there now, in the park, in October, with Logan's hand in hers and Stella ahead on the path arranging leaves by color, with the absolute seriousness of someone doing meaningful work, the feeling was not triumph. It was simpler than triumph. It was something closer to the relief of setting down a weight you'd been carrying so long you'd stopped noticing it. She had stopped noticing it. And then a stranger looked at her foot and saw it move. And she was 30 years old, and the story started again.